In today's episode, we're diving into the most horrifying crocodile encounters ever recorded. From innocent swims gone wrong to terrifying safari attacks, and even people keeping crocodiles as pets. Let's jump straight into the first story. It was August 20th, 2018, and the sun had barely risen over Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. The air was thick with humidity and the morning felt peaceful, almost perfect. The lush landscape of Sea Pines Plantation was quiet at that hour, where Cassandra Klein, known to her friends as Sassy, had her holiday home. The birds had yet to start their chorus, and the only sounds came from the gentle rustling of leaves in the early morning breeze and the soft patter of Cassandra's footsteps as she walked with her dog, Kylie. She had no idea that this simple morning walk would soon cost her a hefty price, one she wouldn't be able to pay. Cassandra had spent most of her life in Endicott, New York, where she had taught kindergarten for 16 years. She was beloved by her students, the kind of teacher who always went the extra mile for her kids. Retirement was just a year away, and she had already planned to leave behind the life she had built in upstate New York for a slower, more peaceful existence in Sea Pines Plantation. For years, she and her husband had spent their summers on Hilton Head Island, falling in love with its beauty and tranquility. It was meant to be their future home, a place to embrace retirement near the calming waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Cassandra had always been an animal lover. She wasn't able to have children, and so her dogs were her babies, her loyal companions. Just 2 weeks before that fateful day, she had lost one of her pets. The grief had still lingered, and now Kylie, her Shetland sheepdog, was her sole source of comfort. They were inseparable. The walk Cassandra was on took them around the side of a lagoon, a large body of water along the golf course that was home to a 9-foot alligator. The alligator, a familiar sight to the locals, was known to frequent the area. Cassandra had always been aware of the dangers of the wildlife on Hilton Head Island. She knew to stay at a safe distance from any water, especially in the warmer months when alligators were more active. She kept at least 14 feet from the water's edge, always mindful of the risks. This morning, the residential estate was quiet. The greenkeeper was working on the 13th green of a nearby golf course just across from the lagoon. Cassandra's footsteps were soft on the ground as she and Kylie walked side by side along the edge of the water. The air was thick with humidity, and the sun had just started to rise, casting long shadows over the lush landscape. The alligator had been lurking in the murky water. Its dark, textured skin blended seamlessly with the shadows, and only its knobby head and eyes were visible above the surface. It was still, waiting for the vibrations that would signal the approach of potential prey. Cassandra, unaware of the predator's proximity, continued her walk, with Kylie sniffing at the undergrowth and occasionally darting toward the edge of the lagoon. The sounds of her paws crunching the grass caught the alligator's attention. It moved quickly. In an instant, the alligator lunged, its jaws snapping at the leash attached to Kylie's collar. The dog, startled, scrambled backward, but the alligator had already grabbed the leash, pulling Kylie toward the water. Cassandra screamed and her heart pounded as she rushed to save her pet. She had always been devoted to her animals, and in that moment, instinct took over. She sprinted toward the water, not thinking of her own safety, but only of Kylie's. The greenskeeper, hearing the commotion from across the lake, looked up. He saw the struggle from across the lagoon as Cassandra fought to free Kylie from the alligator's grip. It was a desperate tug of war, the predator's powerful jaws pulling hard while Cassandra yanked on the leash trying to save her dog. Both Cassandra and Kylie were being dragged closer to the water's edge. Cassandra managed to unclip the leash from Kylie's collar and the dog scrambled to safety. But the moment she was free, the alligator swung its head toward Cassandra. In one swift motion, it latched onto her leg, its powerful jaws clamping down on her flesh. The force of the bite pulled Cassandra further into the water. She screamed, but her cries were drowned out by the sounds of splashing water and the frantic barking of Kylie from the shore. The greenskeeper, now realizing the severity of the situation, pulled out his phone and dialed 911.
911, where's your emergency?
Yeah, there's a lady by an alligator.
Where at, sir?
I'm in C-Pine.
Okay, where at in C-Pine?
Call number 13 of the clock course. I'm not sure what the road is.
Okay, you said that she's being attacked by an alligator?
Yeah, drag her in the water.
Okay, how big was it?
It's probably about 8 feet, maybe 7.
It's dragging her into the water?
And she's in the water right now.
Okay, what hole are you on?
It's hole number 13 up near the green. I'm driving to where the road is so I can tell you the road. I'll be at the road in like 30 seconds.
Okay, was anybody still out there with her?
No, there's one other person there. What do you do? You jump in the water? I don't know.
As the operator dispatched emergency services, the greenskeeper watched helplessly as Cassandra was pulled further into the water. His heart raced as he saw her disappear beneath the surface, the water turning murky and dark as the alligator clung to her. Kylie, from the safety of the shore, barked frantically, but Cassandra's struggle grew weaker. Underwater, Cassandra fought for her life. She kicked and punched the alligator, but the predator's hold on her leg was unyielding. Her vision blurred as she felt herself sinking, her lungs burning for air. In less than a minute, Cassandra's fight came to an end. She slipped into unconsciousness, her body going still beneath the water's surface. The greenskeeper, watching from the shore, could do nothing but pray for a miracle. By the time emergency services arrived, it was too late. The alligator was subdued and euthanized by the responding team, and Cassandra's body was pulled from the water. The EMTs immediately began CPR, but their efforts were in vain. Despite their best attempts, Cassandra had drowned, her body showing signs of the brutal struggle she had endured. Kylie the dog was unharmed. She sat on the shore, her eyes locked on the spot where Cassandra had vanished beneath the water. When Cassandra's family was informed of the tragedy, they were devastated. Her mother, who had been at work when the news broke, could not comprehend that such a freak accident had claimed her daughter's life. Her sister, who broke the news to her mother, was equally shaken. They had lost someone who had been full of life and love, a woman who had dedicated herself to teaching and caring for those around her. To lose her so suddenly was beyond belief. Her colleagues at George Johnson Elementary School in Endicott were devastated. Cassandra had been more than just a teacher, she was a friend, an inspiration, and a source of warmth for everyone around her. Her students adored her for her infectious smile and tireless dedication to their success. At her funeral, stories of her kindness and impact filled the room, while her body, badly damaged by the crocodile, lay as a grim reminder of her tragic end. It was August 23, 2021, when meteorologists first began to take notice of a tropical wave in the Caribbean Sea that was rapidly intensifying. By the 27th, the storm had developed into Hurricane Ida, a powerful system packing winds of over 150 miles per hour. The storm was upgraded to a Category 4 hurricane, and by the 29th, it made landfall in Louisiana, leaving devastation in its wake. Grand Isle, Louisiana, a small barrier island once known for its peaceful beauty, now faced a violent transformation. The island's normally tranquil marshlands had become treacherous, and streets turned into rivers. Homes were swept away, leaving nothing but ruins in the storm's path. Power lines were knocked down, trees were uprooted, and the storm left behind a silence that was both eerie and unsettling. Floodwaters rose higher, submerging everything in their path. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but sorrow. The people in the area endured unimaginable hardships, but some survived to witness the hurricane's devastating effects. Among them was Timothy Satterley, a 71-year-old man who had called Grand Isle home for much of his life. He was one of the fortunate ones. His raised house, designed to withstand the rising waters, remained standing strong against the storm. He and his wife Sandy had a safe haven in the midst of chaos. Timothy, known for his compassionate nature, immediately began helping neighbors in need. Despite losing power, he cooked meals for those who had nothing left, providing what little comfort he could in the face of the storm's destruction. The day ended well, or so it seemed. Timothy and Sandy had weathered the worst of the storm, and for a moment it felt as though their safe haven had protected them from the worst. But little did they know their days in the safety of their home were numbered. On that fateful morning of August 30th, as the clouds began to break and the patches of blue sky emerged, Timothy and Sandy sat in their home exhausted but grateful. Timothy, ever the caretaker, decided to check the shed near their property, which had sustained some damage in the storm. Sandy, settled quietly in her rocking chair, didn't give it much thought. They were used to the aftermath of storms, the flooding and the cleanup. But as she gazed out toward the rising floodwaters, a sudden sharp splashing noise cut through the air, startling her from her thoughts. Her heart raced, sensing something was wrong. Panicking, Sandy rushed outside, convinced that Timothy had fallen into the water. But what she saw when she reached the yard was beyond comprehension. Timothy was locked in a brutal struggle with a massive 12-foot alligator. Its powerful jaws clamped around his body. The beast was dragging him through the rising floodwaters, its strength unrelenting. Timothy fought back, but the alligator spun him in a violent death roll, twisting and thrashing in the murky waters. Then, in one terrifying motion, the creature tore off Timothy's arm, sending it drifting away with the current. Sandy's legs felt weak and fear gripped her chest. She was frozen for a moment, her mind racing as she watched the predator drag her husband further from the shore. Finally, desperation drove her to action. She ran back into the house, grabbing anything she could find to defend Timothy, though she knew it wouldn't be enough. When she returned, the alligator had vanished into the dark depths of the water, its hunger momentarily sated. Timothy lay on the ground, unconscious and bleeding. His life hung in the balance. With all the strength she could muster, Sandy dragged him onto the safety of their front porch, her heart pounding as the waters continued to rise around them. Sirens wailed distantly, but they felt miles away, swallowed by the devastation. Frantic, Sandy rushed back inside the house to grab her phone and call for help, but a cold wave of dread washed over her as she realized there was no power, no service. She was utterly alone, with no one to help but herself. In that moment, Sandy realized that her only hope of saving Timothy was to reach higher ground. Yet the thought of leaving him behind was unbearable, especially with the alligator still lurking in the murky waters. Though it remained out of sight, she could feel its presence, a silent predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But her love for Timothy outweighed her fear. She knew she couldn't hesitate. She had to act. With no time to lose, she grabbed a canoe and pushed it into the rising floodwaters. The current was strong, and the water, now filled with debris, pulled at her from every side. But Sandy paddled onward, focused on getting help for her husband. Every stroke of the paddle felt like an eternity, and the waters seemed endless. But eventually she reached an area where she could get a signal. With trembling hands, she managed to make a desperate mayday call to the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office. Her voice cracked as she delivered the news, barely able to process the reality of what had happened. As soon as the call was made, Sandy felt a brief moment of calm, but it didn't last. A sinking realization washed over her. She'd made the choice to leave Timothy behind, wounded and vulnerable. The weight of that decision hit her like a tidal wave, and her chest tightened with guilt. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she paddled back toward their home, each stroke taking her closer to him, yet further from any hope of undoing what had already been done. The floodwaters had risen higher, debris floating all around her. The house seemed to stand as a silent witness to the horrors that had already unfolded. When she arrived back, the worst had already come to pass. Timothy was gone. The bloodstains that had once marked the porch were now partially washed away, leaving only faint traces of the violence that had occurred. Sandy frantically searched the house, calling his name, hoping that somehow he had managed to escape. But there was no sign of him. The water continued to rise, washing away all evidence of the attack, as if nature itself were erasing the memory of what had happened. When the authorities arrived, they joined Sandy in the search. Law enforcement officers and Louisiana wildlife and fisheries agents combed the area, calling out for Timothy, but there was no sign of him. The alligator, a 12-foot monster, was still lurking in the marshes, and Sandy feared it had dragged her husband into the depths. But without a body, they could not declare Timothy dead. The search continued, but hope was fading. Days turned into weeks as the authorities tirelessly searched for both the alligator and Timothy's remains. Traps were set, drones were deployed, and cadaver dogs were brought in to search the marshes. With over 2 million alligators in Louisiana's waterways, the task of finding the right one seemed impossible. But 2 weeks after Timothy's disappearance, the breakthrough came. A drone spotted a large alligator near the site of the attack. It was a 12-footer, matching the description Sandy had given. The authorities set the trap and captured the beast, which weighed 504 pounds. Forensic experts performed a necropsy on the creature, and inside its stomach they found fragments of human remains, parts of a face, jaw, and hand. DNA testing confirmed what Sandy and the family had feared. The remains belonged to Timothy. With the alligator's death, the tragic chapter came to a close. Although it brought some closure, it could never erase the trauma that Sandy, Timothy's family, and the community had endured. The alligator was the first to be implicated in a fatal attack in Louisiana in nearly 2 centuries, a stark reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. The investigation sparked discussions about the growing danger of alligator attacks, particularly in the aftermath of storms like Hurricane Ida, which displaced wildlife and brought predators into closer contact with humans. As the waters receded, the residents of Grand Isle could only reflect on the thin line between the beauty of their surroundings and the dangers that lurked beneath. The storm was over, but its legacy would forever haunt Sandy. Even as the floodwaters began to recede, the memory of Timothy's final moments would never wash away. On a scorching Saturday afternoon in August 2013, the Mary River Wilderness Retreat in Australia's Northern Territory bustled with life. Nestled between Darwin and Kakudu National Park, the retreat offered an escape into the rugged beauty of the outback. Known for its serene atmosphere and wildlife-rich surroundings, the Mary River also harbored a hidden menace. Beneath its calm, murky surface swam one of the largest saltwater crocodiles on the planet. Sean Cole, a 26-year-old IT professional from Darwin, had joined a group of about 15 friends to celebrate one of their birthdays at the retreat. It was a festive gathering, full of laughter, drinks, and the camaraderie of close friends. Known for his friendly, adventurous spirit, Sean was a beloved figure among his peers. A tech-savvy individual by trade, he relished outdoor adventures as an escape from the routine of office life. For Sean, this weekend was an opportunity to unwind and embrace the outback's rugged beauty. However, the idyllic setting concealed a perilous truth. The Mary River had the highest concentration of saltwater crocodiles in the world, with recent surveys recording multiple individuals over 13 feet long in just a small stretch of the waterway. As the party unfolded, Sean and a friend decided to challenge themselves with a daring swim across the river. Perhaps fueled by adrenaline, alcohol, or a false sense of invincibility, they ignored the warnings posted along the banks. Brightly colored signs cautioned visitors of the dangers lurking beneath the surface, and retreat staff had explicitly advised against venturing into the water. But emboldened by their group's encouragement and the thrill of the moment, Sean and his friend made their way to the river's edge. The merry river was deceptively tranquil that day, its surface glimmering under the sun. With cheers from their friends and the watchful gaze of a nearby boat crew, the two men plunged into the water. The river spanned nearly 600 feet at that point, its width hiding the predators that patrolled its depths. Stroke by stroke, the pair made their way across, their laughter echoing over the water. Against all odds, both men reached the far bank unscathed. Exhilarated by their success, they decided to make the return trip. As they swam back toward their friends, the group watched from the shore, their excitement tinged with unease. The atmosphere shifted suddenly when a third figure appeared in the water behind Sean and his friend. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, but as the shape drew closer, its true nature became horrifyingly clear. It was an enormous crocodile, its head cutting through the water like a silent torpedo. The massive predator created a bow wave as it closed the distance, its intent unmistakable. Sean's friend, slightly ahead, heard the frantic shouts from the shore and turned to see the crocodile's gnarled head just feet away. Panic surged through the group as they screamed warnings, but it was too late. Sean, trailing behind, was the crocodile's target. The beast lunged, its powerful jaws clamping onto Sean's torso with crushing force. A deafening splash marked the attack as Sean was yanked into a violent death roll, the water churning with chaos. Sean's screams mixed with the panicked cries of his friends as the predator's immense strength overwhelmed him. The death roll disoriented Sean and shattered his rib cage under the incredible pressure of the crocodile's bite force. The water churned violently as Sean's bright swim trunks briefly surfaced, only to vanish again beneath the muddy depths. The river, once peaceful, became a nightmarish scene of raw, predatory power. From the riverbank, Sean's friends could only watch in helpless horror. His friend scrambled to safety, clawing his way onto the shore as the predator disappeared beneath the surface with Sean in its grip. The river grew eerily still, the only remnants of the attack a few ripples fading into the current. For agonizing minutes, the group waited, their eyes scanning the water for any sign of Sean. Then, as if to confirm their worst fears, the crocodile re-emerged, its massive jaws holding Sean's lifeless body. The predator swam upstream, its prize still clamped in its teeth, before vanishing into the murky depths once more. Emergency services quickly mobilized, with police, park rangers, and wildlife experts launching a coordinated search effort. Boats scoured the river, their crews scanning the surface for signs of the predator or its victim. Large crocodiles were sighted in the area, but distinguishing the culprit proved difficult. To ensure the safety of the search teams, authorities culled several crocodiles near the attack site. Days passed without any sign of his body, leaving those who knew him in a state of anguish. Then, on the third day, the river yielded its grim evidence. Sean's remains surfaced just 600 feet from the attack site, likely dislodged by the commotion of the search boats. Nearby, a 15-foot crocodile was spotted lurking in the water, believed to be the predator responsible for the attack. Authorities culled the animal, providing Sean's loved ones with a small measure of closure, though the haunting memory of the tragedy remained. It was November 13, 2015, in the middle of the night in Palm Bay, Florida. The thick, humid air hung heavily in the still night, shrouding the streets in a quiet darkness. Matthew Riggins, a 22-year-old man, was no stranger to the shadows. He moved through them with purpose, not seeking comfort, but rather the concealment they offered. On this night, the darkness served a dual role, as a cover and as a way out. His focus was sharp as he set off for Barefoot Bay, his mind already on the task at hand. Barefoot Bay, a small, quiet community nestled along Florida's eastern coast, was known for its warm climate and its mix of retirees and seasonal residents. Matthew had been here before. He knew the streets, the layout of the homes. It was an ideal place for burglary. deserted at night with low traffic and few disturbances. His plan was simple: target several properties, take whatever he could, and be back by early morning. The thrill of the chase kept him going, and the law, it didn't concern him just yet. Matthew and his accomplice worked their way through the neighborhood, moving quietly between the houses. Both men wore dark clothing, avoiding the streetlights, slipping into the shadows like ghosts. They were efficient, yet not unnoticed. Several residents had already seen them through their windows. The flickering of lights began up and down the street, alerting the neighborhood to the intruders. At around 2 a.m., local authorities were alerted. A resident had called in a report of 2 suspicious men. Within minutes, sheriffs were on the scene, and a police helicopter along with canine units were dispatched to sweep the area. The faint hum of the chopper echoed through the night sky as its spotlight cut through the darkness. Matthew and his friend fled, splitting up in an attempt to avoid capture. Matthew, now alone, found a secluded spot behind a house. His heart raced as the adrenaline surged through him. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his girlfriend. His voice trembled, low and panicked, as he told her he was being chased, that the canine units were closing in. He warned her he might not make it through the night, and promised to lay low until the danger passed. It was the last time she would ever hear from him. To evade capture, Matthew decided to head for the water. Barefoot Bay Pond, a large freshwater lake, seemed like the perfect place to hide. The water would mask his scent, and the police wouldn't think to search there. But in his panic, Matthew failed to consider one crucial detail: a predator already stalking the depths of the lake. Florida, home to over 1.3 million alligators, had many bodies of water that harbored these ancient predators. Barefoot Bay Pond was no exception, but in his desperation, Matthew was blind to the danger beneath the surface. As he waded into the water, the cool sensation wrapping around his leg sent a shiver up his spine. He crouched low behind the thick vegetation along the shore, watching the flashlights flickering in the distance. His heart pounded. The canine units would never think to look here. He was safe, or so he thought. Unbeknownst to him, an 11-foot alligator was already closing in. The creature's sensitive pressure sensors along its snout detected even the slightest disturbance in the water. The alligator was patient. It waited for the right moment, and Matthew, oblivious to the looming danger, remained still, his focus fixed on the searchlights above. The alligator, with its powerful body gliding silently through the water, was closing in. Matthew didn't notice it until it was too late. With terrifying speed, the alligator struck. Matthew's first instinct was to assume it was a police dog. He cried out in surprise, his voice catching in his throat as the pressure on his legs grew. But it wasn't a dog's bite, it was something much stronger. The alligator's jaws locked onto his legs with a force exceeding 2,000 pounds per square inch. His body was yanked off balance as the predator dragged him into the deeper water. His legs burned with pain, but he tried to break free, scrambling in the water, pushing against the alligator's grip. But the more he fought, the more the creature tightened its hold. Panic surged through him. His legs were trapped. The alligator dragged him further into the murky water, the darkness closing in around him. The officers still sweeping the neighborhood could hear his cries, but they couldn't pinpoint where they were coming from. They didn't know Matthew had already fallen victim to an apex predator lurking in the pond. Minutes passed like hours as Matthew struggled against the relentless pull. His strength began to wane, his body growing heavier with each passing moment. The alligator's grip never loosened. His vision blurred, his lungs burned as the cold water filled them. And then, everything went black. The alligator, having secured its kill, pulled Matthew's lifeless body deeper into the water. It held the body tightly in its jaws, continuing to drag it through the depths. The predator wasn't done yet. It would not leave its meal. That night, the police scoured the area, but they did not find him. The predator had kept its prize. Matthew's body was discovered 10 days later after his family had reported him missing. The discovery came too late. His body, when found, was in a horrific state. His legs and one arm had been torn away, and his body had been savaged by the alligator. Divers approaching the body were met with an aggressive response. The alligator, still defending its kill, attacked the divers, snapping its jaws at them as they drew closer. The creature would not abandon its prize. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission responded, calling in an expert trapper to handle the situation. When the alligator was finally captured and killed, its stomach contents revealed human remains, consistent with Matthew's injuries, including a hand and a foot. It was believed that Matthew had drowned before being partially consumed by the predator. This was the alligator's way of dealing with larger prey, subduing it, dragging it under the water, and tearing it apart in a series of violent death rolls. Matthew's accomplice, who had been with him that night, was eventually found and questioned by authorities. He refused to cooperate, unwilling to divulge details about the burglary or his friend's fate, and was ultimately released without charge. It was a humid afternoon in the coastal area of South Carolina, where the sun glinted off the distant Atlantic, creating a shimmering illusion of water and air blending together. On Kiowa Island, Cynthia Covert was making her way to Ava Howell's house, unaware that the serene setting would soon turn into a scene of unimaginable horror. A 58-year-old nail artist by profession, Cynthia had always lived a life rooted in routine, finding comfort in the simple pleasures of work and conversation. Her business had become a stable source of income for years, but the recent health crisis that gripped the world had thrown a wrench into her life. With salons shut down, Cynthia found herself scrambling to find work wherever she could. The solution? Bringing her services to her clients at home. It wasn't ideal, but it allowed Cynthia to maintain some semblance of normalcy. On this particular day, she was heading to Ava's house to do her nails. Kiowa Island was a place known for its natural beauty, surrounded by marshlands and waterways, with the occasional alligator slipping through the still waters. This day, as Cynthia arrived at Ava's home, a large alligator lay in the pond in the backyard, blissfully unaware of the coming events. Ava had known Cynthia for years, but something about her demeanor that day struck her as unusual. Cynthia was acting more excited than normal, speaking animatedly about her boyfriend traveling to visit her from Tennessee. As they sat on the porch, Cynthia worked on Ava's nails while sipping a glass of wine, something Ava thought was odd given her usually professional behavior. It seemed that the nail artist had taken the opportunity to unwind, perhaps more than she should have, but Ava, unsure of how to address the issue, let it slide. Before the pandemic, Cynthia had always been a calm and collected presence. Her clients knew her as someone who spoke in measured tones and focused on making their nails look perfect. But today, there was a noticeable shift. As she spoke about her boyfriend who would be visiting soon, she became more animated, her usual professionalism slipping. Ava couldn't help but wonder if the stress of the pandemic and her new work arrangements had taken a toll. Still, she said nothing, trying to focus on the task at hand. As the session concluded and the porch was tidied up, Cynthia glanced back toward the pond where the alligator still rested. Something about the creature seemed to draw her in, and she decided to get closer. With a camera in hand, she slowly moved toward the edge of the pond, snapping pictures of the alligator, inching closer with each shot. Ava, who had been cleaning up, immediately noticed the danger and called out to her friend. She warned Cynthia that the alligator had recently taken a deer from the same spot, and it was not safe to approach. But Cynthia scoffed at the warning, dismissing the threat. "I'm not a deer," she reportedly said before taking another step toward the edge. Ava's heart sank as she watched Cynthia's careless approach, the alligator's massive form still resting in the water. The reptile, at least 12 feet in length, lay motionless, but Ava knew better than to trust its stillness. This alligator, like many others in the area, was a native species of South Carolina. Once near the brink of extinction due to hunting and habitat loss, the alligator's population had rebounded dramatically, with more frequent human-animal encounters as a result. This particular alligator had been spotted on multiple occasions in the pond, but Ava had never seen it so close. Then, in a split second, it happened. The alligator, quick as lightning, snapped its powerful jaws around Cynthia's left leg, dragging her into the pond. The horrifying scene unfolded too quickly for anyone to react. Ava's scream pierced the air, but oddly, Cynthia remained silent, even as she was pulled beneath the surface. Ava's husband, hearing the commotion, rushed outside to try to help. The neighbor, hearing the chaos from his own home, ran over to see if he could assist. In a desperate attempt to save Cynthia, the neighbor threw a rope into the pond, hoping that she could grab hold. But despite their combined strength, the group struggled to pull Cynthia to safety. The alligator's grip was unyielding. As the reptile pulled Cynthia deeper into the pond, it began to execute a maneuver known as the death roll. This horrific tactic involved the alligator spinning with its prey in its jaws, a technique designed to incapacitate and drown the victim. Cynthia, who had been struggling to keep afloat, appeared calm in the midst of the attack, offering only a chilling remark, "I guess I won't do this again." Ava quickly dialed emergency services. Within minutes, law enforcement and firefighters arrived at the scene, charging into the backyard to help. For a brief moment, there was no movement in the water, neither from Cynthia nor the alligator. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, Cynthia's body surfaced, the alligator still holding onto her leg. Without hesitation, one of the deputies fired a shot at the alligator, forcing it to release its grip. It swam off into the depths of the pond, leaving Cynthia's limp form floating in the water. The emergency responders immediately pulled Cynthia to shore. They found her body intact, but her left leg had been severely injured by the alligator's attack. Paramedics rushed to treat her, and she was quickly transported to the hospital. However, despite the swift efforts to save her, Cynthia was declared dead upon arrival. The official cause of death was drowning, though it was clear that the alligator's attack had contributed to her demise. The tragic incident marked the third alligator-related death in South Carolina within a span of 4 years, highlighting the growing risks of human-animal interaction in the region. Though alligators are typically shy and avoid humans, their increasing populations, coupled with the encroachment of human activity into their natural habitats, had led to more encounters. It was unclear why Cynthia had acted so recklessly that day, whether it was the wine, the excitement of the visit from her boyfriend, or something else entirely. But her untimely death served as a tragic reminder of the unpredictability of nature. For those who knew Cynthia, her passing was a shock. She had been known for her kindness and her talent as a nail artist, always ready with a story or a piece of advice for her clients. Her sudden and violent end left a void in the lives of those who had loved her, a reminder of how fragile life can be when nature's creatures are underestimated. The alligator, though a remarkable and ancient creature, was not meant to be underestimated. Alligators, while fascinating with their almost prehistoric eyes and powerful jaws, remain dangerous, especially when approached carelessly. Cynthia's tragic end serves as a reminder that even the most magnificent creatures, when given the chance, will act on their instincts, indifferent to the curiosity or carelessness of humans. It was September 2005 on the remote and rugged Groote Island, located approximately 30 miles off the coast of Northern Territory, Australia. Russell Harris, born and raised in the UK, had long dreamt of adventure. He had traveled the world before settling in Australia, where he met and married Jennifer. Together, they sought out the warmth of northern Australia, as Russell had secured a position with the Anglo-American mining group BHP Billiton. His job as a technical services superintendent brought them to the vast, mostly untouched island. Groote Island, Australia's fourth largest, was a haven for wildlife and home to one of the richest manganese reserves in the world. Despite the rough and largely barren terrain, it offered a promising opportunity for Russell. Groote Island, with its stunning coastline, was surrounded by some of the most pristine turquoise waters imaginable. While the island was home to many Aborigines, particularly the Warramunga people, it was also a paradise for the birds and animals that called it home. It boasted 83 bird species and was a nesting ground for green and hawk-billed turtles. Despite the island's heavy mining on the western side, it remained an undiscovered sanctuary of sorts. But, like all paradises, it had its darker side. The waters that lapped against the shores were home to more than just tranquil sea life. They were patrolled by sharks, and lurking in the shadows were saltwater crocodiles, ancient, silent predators of terrifying size and power. On this particular day, Russell and Jennifer were joined by another couple, both of whom worked with Russell at the mining company. The four of them decided to take a day trip to Picnic Beach, a scenic and secluded area located in the northeast of the island. Despite the rough road that led to it, the journey was worth the effort. The beach was everything they had hoped for, a stretch of soft, flower-like sand and clear, inviting water. The bay was picture perfect, a place where the group could escape the demands of their work and relax. Jennifer and her friend stayed behind on the sand, while Russell and his companion decided to explore the water. The two men waded into the surf up to their waists before pulling on their snorkels and masks. As they submerged themselves into the inviting water, they marveled at the vibrant underwater world. Brightly colored fish darted among the coral, while large rosses swam near the seafloor. The water was clearer than they could have imagined, offering a view that stretched for yards below them. They swam and dived, pointing out sights to each other, enjoying the idyllic surroundings. What they didn't know, however, was that danger was not far away. Despite its beauty, Groote Island's coastal waters were far from safe. Saltwater crocodiles, larger and more aggressive than their freshwater counterparts, were known to inhabit the region. These creatures, capable of reaching lengths of over 20 feet and with a bite force strong enough to crush bone, were responsible for several attacks on humans each year. Most locals and visitors alike were cautious near riverways and estuaries, but few thought to consider the crocodile threat when swimming in open water. They should have been aware. Russell had heard about the crocodiles, but he had been assured that the area around Picnic Beach was safe. Little did he know, a predator was already closing in on them. While the two men swam near each other, neither noticed the large crocodile silently making its way toward them. The 15-foot predator had been drawn by the vibrations of the men's movements in the water. Using its natural instincts, the saltwater crocodile navigated effortlessly through the water, its tail propelling it toward its prey. Russell and his friend, unaware of the impending danger, continued to explore the sea life below. It wasn't until the crocodile was mere feet away that Russell felt an unexpected tug at his waist. At first, he thought it was a shark, but when he turned around, he was met with the terrifying sight of the crocodile's olive-green, scaly skin. Before he could react, the predator dragged him beneath the water. The fight for survival was brutal and swift. Russell's instincts kicked in, and he struggled against the crocodile, trying to pry its massive jaws off his waist. The creature's bite was unimaginable. Its powerful jaws crushed down with 3,700 pounds per square inch of force, the strongest bite in the animal kingdom. Russell fought for his life, but the crocodile was relentless. It rolled its body over and over, dragging him through the water, disorienting him with each twist. The pressure was unbearable, and Russell could feel his strength slowly fading. He could see the surface of the water just above him, but it was out of reach. Meanwhile, his friend, blissfully unaware of the terror unfolding just beneath the surface, continued his snorkeling. He dove down to examine a fish near the sea floor, but when he surfaced, he noticed Russell was gone. Confused and concerned, he called out, but there was no reply. He dove back under, scanning the area for any sign of his friend. When nothing turned up, he swam back to the beach, assuming Russell had made it out of the water already. As he stood on the shore, wiping the salt water from his face, he saw Jennifer and the other woman looking up, expecting Russell to return. That was when the cold realization hit him. Something had happened to their friend. His body hadn't been found, and no one had heard a commotion in the water. They quickly called emergency services, and a frantic search for Russell began. Hours passed, and the search for Russell took on a sense of urgency. The authorities dispatched boats while the police flew overhead in a plane, searching for any sign of the missing man. As the hours stretched into the night, the possibility of Russell's disappearance being due to the strong currents of the ocean was raised. Had he been attacked and taken by a predator like a shark or crocodile, or had he drowned? The search continued through the night, with everyone hoping for a miracle. The next day, the search was still underway. It wasn't until the following day that the search bore fruit. Russell's body was discovered, floating just outside the mouth of 8 Mile Creek, a river about a mile from Picnic Beach. As the police moved in to retrieve the body, a massive crocodile appeared in the water, swirling protectively around the body. It was clear the crocodile had been defending its kill. The injuries sustained to Russell's body were consistent with a prolonged struggle, indicating that he had fought fiercely but ultimately succumbed to the crocodile's brutal attack. Back in the UK, news of Russell's death struck his family with overwhelming force. His mother, devastated by the loss of her son, collapsed upon hearing the news. She was rushed to the hospital, sedated and unable to process what had happened. At that moment, she had no understanding of the true circumstances. She was only told that Russell had gone missing at sea and was presumed drowned. Russell's sister flew to Darwin to identify his body, struggling to accept the harsh reality. It wasn't until his remains were examined and authorities completed their investigation that the full truth emerged. Russell had not simply drowned, he had been attacked by a crocodile. The revelation sent a wave of shock through his family, amplifying their grief as they learned the horrifying details of his final moments. The tragedy of Russell's death became a somber lesson in the dangers of the Australian wilderness. Although the area around Picnic Beach had always been thought of as safe, it was clear that the crocodile population was much larger than originally believed. Russell had no way of knowing that a 15-foot crocodile was lurking in the shallow waters, waiting for the right moment to strike. Had he been fully aware of the danger, he never would have entered the water that day. The incident was a painful reminder of the unpredictability of nature. In an instant, a serene snorkeling trip turned into a battle for life, one that ended in tragedy. The story of Russell Harris became a quiet warning to others about the hidden dangers of Australia's wild places. Despite the beauty of the island and the allure of its waters, it was not without its risks, and for Russell, the cost was his life. On August 23, 2018, the Okavango Delta in Botswana shimmered under the relentless African sun, temperatures soaring to 104 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. For 38-year-old Luc Moreau, a marketing executive from Lyon, France, this luxury safari represented not just a vacation, but an escape, a hard-earned pause from a relentless, fast-paced life. For nearly 2 decades, Luc had thrived in a high-pressure corporate environment known for his quick thinking, sharp instincts, and tireless work ethic. Colleagues admired him, clients trusted him, and his firm saw him as indispensable. But behind his clean-cut appearance and confident presentations was a man running dangerously low on fuel. He lived alone in a modest, minimalist apartment in Lyon's Confluence district, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Saône River. Every morning he followed the same routine: 5:30 a.m. gym sessions, black coffee, tailored suit, and a barrage of emails before the office even opened. He rarely took vacations, preferring to rack up unused leave while climbing the corporate ladder. Friends had often teased him about his workaholic streak, but Luke had always insisted he was fine, that he'd rest once things settled down. That break never came. After finalizing a major merger that had consumed 18 months of his life, Luke finally hit a wall. He began experiencing migraines, minor panic attacks, and long stretches of mental fog. His doctor had urged him to take time off. A colleague recently back from southern Africa had casually mentioned the Okavango Delta as a peaceful paradise. That same night, Luke had gone online and booked a 2-week stay at Mokolodi Delta Camp, a high-end lodge known for privacy, gourmet cuisine, and raw, unfiltered wilderness. He arrived 3 days before the incident, immediately charmed by the camp's elegant thatched roof cabins overlooking a small lake that branched off from the main delta channels. His accommodation featured an outdoor shower, a private deck, and uninterrupted views of wildlife coming to drink at the water's edge. Luke was struck by how quiet it was. No phones ringing, no buzzing notifications, no artificial urgency. He found himself sleeping longer, breathing deeper, and walking slower, finally feeling like a version of himself he hadn't known in years. During check-in, the lodge manager, Precious Indlovu, had conducted a thorough safety briefing. She had stressed that guests should never walk unescorted after dark and that swimming in the lake was strictly prohibited due to crocodiles and hippos. Luke had nodded along, though his focus had already drifted to the elephants visible just beyond the deck. He didn't mean to be careless, he just desperately wanted to disconnect. That morning, Luke had joined 5 other guests for a 6-hour game drive led by Cabo, an experienced guide with encyclopedic knowledge of the Delta's ecosystem. The Land Cruiser had departed at 5:30 a.m., allowing them to witness a spectacular sunrise over the floodplains. By 10 a.m., they had already spotted lions lounging after a kill, a leopard draped elegantly over an acacia branch, and countless antelope species grazing on the lush vegetation. Cabo had positioned the vehicle perfectly for photographs, explaining the behavior of each animal with passionate detail. As the day heated up, Luke found himself increasingly uncomfortable. Despite the canvas roof of the safari vehicle, the sun beat down mercilessly, and his light linen shirt clung to his back with sweat. He drained his water bottle quickly, accepting a refill from Cabo's cooler. By the time they returned to the lodge at 11:30 a.m., Luke was thoroughly overheated. While the other guest headed to the dining area for lunch, he retreated to his cabin. The shower provided temporary relief, but stepping back into the humid air left him feeling sticky and uncomfortable almost immediately. From his deck, Luke gazed longingly at the lake just 164 feet from his cabin. The water looked cool and inviting, its surface glassy and still in the midday heat. He could see no signs of the dangerous animals mentioned in the safety briefing, no hippo ears protruding from the surface, no crocodiles sunning themselves on the banks. Just clear, tempting water that promised blessed relief from the oppressive heat. Luke checked his watch, 1:15 p.m. The afternoon game drive wouldn't depart until 4 p.m., leaving nearly 3 hours to kill. What he craved was solitude and coolness. He told himself it would just be a quick dip. 5 minutes in and out, no one would even notice. Decision made, Luke changed into swimming trunks and grabbed a towel. He scanned the area around his cabin. No staff members were visible in the midday heat, most likely taking their own breaks between the morning and afternoon activities. As Luke approached the water's edge, he noticed a faded sign partially obscured by vegetation. Danger, no swimming crocodiles. He hesitated briefly, then rationalized his decision. The water was clear enough that he could see the sandy bottom near the shore. Surely any large predator would be visible. Besides, he would stay inside the shallows just deep enough to submerge his overheated body briefly before returning to his cabin. At 1:22 p.m., Luke stepped into the lake, sighing with pleasure as the cool water enveloped his ankles, then his calves. The bottom was firm sand, sloping gradually deeper. He waded out until the water reached his waist, then bent his knees to submerge his shoulders. The relief was immediate and exquisite. He closed his eyes, savoring the sensation of heat leaving his body, completely unaware that his movements had already been detected. The Nile crocodile that had claimed this section of the lake as its territory was a massive specimen, nearly 16 feet long and weighing approximately 1,100 pounds. It had been resting in a reed-covered inlet about 90 feet from where Luke entered the water. Though nearly invisible with only its nostrils and eyes breaking the surface, the ancient predator had immediately sensed the vibration of Luke's entrance into its domain. Crocodiles are patient hunters, having perfected their ambush technique over 200 million years of evolution. This particular specimen began moving toward Luke with barely a ripple, its powerful tail propelling it silently through the water while its body remained completely submerged. Its cold, prehistoric brain registered only one thing: prey had entered its territory. Luke, feeling wonderfully refreshed, decided to wade a few feet deeper to fully immerse himself. The water now reached his chest as he moved parallel to the shore, unaware that death was approaching from behind at frightening speed. His first indication that something was wrong came when he noticed small fish darting away in all directions, a split-second warning that came far too late. The attack was devastatingly swift and precise. The crocodile surged forward in a final explosive burst, its massive jaws clamping around Luke's right thigh with bone-crushing force. Over 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch, more than enough to shatter his femur instantly, closed on his flesh. Luke's scream of shock and agony echoed across the water, cut short as the crocodile executed its instinctive death roll. The predator spun violently, twisting Luke underwater in a disorienting spiral designed to tear chunks from its prey and drown it simultaneously. Water filled his lungs as he was dragged beneath the surface, his body contorting unnaturally with the force of the rotation. His fingers clawed desperately at the crocodile's armored snout, finding no purchase on the prehistoric scales. For a brief moment, the crocodile paused its rolling and Luke broke the surface, gasping and choking. He managed to scream for help before being dragged under again. On the shore, a groundskeeper who had been trimming vegetation heard the cry and looked up in horror to see the water churning violently about 200 feet from the bank. The crocodile rolled again, more powerfully this time. Underwater, Luke felt his consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation and shock took their toll. The pain in his shattered leg had become strangely distant, his body shutting down non-essential functions as it entered survival mode. In his final moments of awareness, he registered being dragged deeper into the lake, away from the shore, away from any possibility of rescue. The groundskeeper ran toward the main lodge, shouting for help. Staff quickly responded, launching a small aluminum boat used for emergency purposes. By the time Cabo and two others reached the lake center, there was nothing to see but expanding ripples and floating reeds. Luke Moreau had vanished completely, dragged to the crocodile's underwater cache, a submerged hollow in the riverbank where large prey is stored until it begins to decompose, making it easier for the reptile to tear apart. A search was immediately launched, with staff members scanning the shoreline and security personnel notifying local authorities. Lodge guests were confined to their cabins as the grim reality of what had happened became clear. Precious, the lodge manager, contacted the French embassy in Gaborone to report the incident, her voice shaking as she explained the circumstances. Luke's body was discovered nearly 24 hours later, partially submerged in a reed bed approximately 650 feet from where he had entered the water. In warmer, oxygen-rich shallows like this part of the delta, decomposition can sometimes release gases quickly enough to float a body within a day. The crocodile had consumed significant portions of his torso and right leg, leaving behind a grisly reminder of nature's brutal efficiency. A team from the Botswana Wildlife Authority captured and euthanized the crocodile responsible, a notorious specimen that local fishermen had nicknamed Old Ghost for its ability to appear and disappear without warning. Mokolodi Delta Camp temporarily closed for a comprehensive safety review, installing additional fencing around water access points and implementing hourly security patrols. Warning signs were made larger and more prominent with multilingual instructions about the lethal danger posed by the Delta's predators. It was December 7, 2010, a warm, humid day on the Lukuga River in the heart of the Congo Basin. The dense canopy of trees cast dappled shadows over the slow-moving water, giving the river an almost serene appearance. But beneath its calm surface lay a world of predators, unseen and deadly, waiting in silence. For Hendry Coetzee, this stretch of the river was just another chapter in a life defined by pushing the limits of adventure. Hendry, born and raised in South Africa, was not your typical thrill-seeker. Known for his deep intellect and insatiable hunger for discovery, he often walked a fine line between bravery and recklessness. Adventure wasn't just a passion for Hendry, it was a calling. He once wrote that his greatest fear was not dying but failing to live a life fully embraced. Yet his relentless quest for the extraordinary came with a price, one he seemed to understand better than anyone. Friends often recalled Hendry's calm acceptance of his mortality, his belief that the wild had its own rules and that he was merely a visitor in its domain. Hendry's resume was as vast as the African landscapes he explored. He had guided expeditions along some of the most dangerous rivers on the continent, including the mighty Congo and the Zambezi. In 2004, he completed a historic paddle down the entire length of the Nile River, braving everything from crocodile-infested waters to armed conflicts. Hendry's unmatched skills and instincts earned him the respect of the adventure community, but they also fueled his restlessness. He was a man who could never stay still for long. By 2010, Hendry had tried to leave his life of high-risk exploration behind. He dreamed of settling down, of finding purpose beyond the adrenaline rush of expeditions. But when two American professional kayakers, Ben Stooksbury and Chris Korbelik, approached him for help navigating the uncharted waters of the Lukuga River, the pull of adventure was too strong to resist. The trio embarked on their journey in late October, paddling through remote and treacherous waters, their expedition a blend of awe-inspiring landscapes and ever-present danger. The Congo Basin was no stranger to death. Decades of conflict had claimed millions of lives, many of which ended in the river. The waters had become a feeding ground for crocodiles, their populations thriving on a diet of human remains. Locals warned the kayakers of the predators that lurked beneath, creatures so large they defied belief. But Hendry, ever composed, assured his companions that they could avoid trouble if they followed a few basic rules. Make noise to avoid surprising the animals, steer clear of calm eddies where hippos might lurk, and paddle swiftly past any crocodile sunbathing on the banks. On that fateful day, the three kayakers paddled close together, their plastic boats slicing through the still water. The river was unusually calm, and Hendry led the way, his presence a quiet reassurance to Ben and Chris. They had passed a few small crocodiles earlier, their log-like forms barely stirring as the trio glided by. The men were accustomed to spotting danger like the knobby protrusions of a crocodile's head or the telltale ripples of a hippo beneath the surface. But on this day, a particular predator gave no warning. As they rounded a bend, the river widened, the water flowing slow and quiet. Hendry was in the center, Ben slightly ahead, and Chris trailing a few feet behind. Ben glanced over his shoulder to check their formation when he saw it, a massive crocodile rising from the depths. The creature was nearly 15 feet long, its head alone the size of a small child. It surfaced silently, its eyes fixed on Hendry. Hendry turned his head just in time to see the beast. There was no time for fear, no chance to react. In an instant, the crocodile lunged, its powerful jaws clamping onto Hendry's left shoulder. The immense bite force, estimated at over 4,000 pounds per square inch, crushed his chest and neck, leaving him powerless against the attack. The predator's muscular tail whipped through the water, creating a violent surge as it dragged Hendry beneath the surface. Ben and Chris watched in horror as Hendry's kayak flipped, thrashing violently for several moments before vanishing into the murky depths. The water churned with chaos, a gut-churning contrast to its earlier calm. For a brief moment, the crocodile surfaced, its massive body twisting as it performed a death roll, a brutal maneuver designed to tear apart its prey. Hendry's cries were swallowed by the river as the crocodile's powerful movements left no doubt about its dominance. The men shouted Hendry's name, their voices echoing through the jungle, but there was no response. His red kayak surfaced a few seconds later, eerily intact and empty. The predator had claimed its prize. In shock, Ben and Chris paddled frantically to the riverbank, their hearts pounding as they processed what had just happened. Reaching a nearby village, they begged for help, hoping against hope that Hendry could still be found. The locals, however, were unwilling to venture into the water. For years, they had lived in fear of the crocodiles, creatures that had taken countless lives from their community. The villagers knew what Ben and Chris could not yet accept. Hendry was gone. The following hours were a blur of desperation. The kayakers scoured the riverbanks, searching for any sign of their friend. All they found was Hendry's paddle and his empty kayak, both floating downstream, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded. The realization set in. Hendry had been taken by one of nature's most fearsome predators, his life extinguished in a matter of seconds. The Lukuga River, with its serene beauty and hidden dangers, had claimed another victim. Hendry Coetzee, a man who had dedicated his life to exploring the untamed corners of the world, had become part of the wilderness he loved so much. Hendry's story, defined by his fearless spirit and insatiable quest for the unknown, reflects the profound risks he was willing to take to truly live. His life embodied his belief that the edge of danger was where he felt most alive, even as it ultimately claimed him. It was late June 2024 in the quiet township of Naranga, nestled in the Northern Territory of Australia. The sun lingered low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the landscape. Naranga was a small, tight-knit community of 360 residents, most of whom were Indigenous Australians. With less than 400 people, you can only imagine how close everyone was. Life here was simple, communal, and deeply rooted in tradition. The evenings were often spent together, families and neighbors gathering to share stories and meals. That evening, as was customary, many of the town's residents made their way to the familiar waters of the creek to cool off and unwind. But what they didn't know was that this would be an evening unlike any other, one that would leave an indelible mark on the community. Barbara, a 12-year-old girl, was among the children who eagerly ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the bushland. The creek was a favorite spot, a place where the children could splash and play while the adults chatted under the shade of the gum trees. Barbara and her cousin, along with 11 other children, wasted no time diving into the cool water, their voices mingling with the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The adults, some sipping beers, others sharing snacks, watched from the bank, their presence a comforting backdrop. As the afternoon wore on, the group began to thin. Some children wandered back to the shore while others floated lazily, savoring the last moments of daylight. Barbara lay on her back, her body buoyed by the water, her breaths controlled as she floated downstream. She was lost in the moment, unaware of how far she had drifted from her cousin and the others. The creek's gentle current carried her toward the bend where it met a broader, deeper river. Unbeknownst to Barbara, the current was silently carrying her toward the crocodile's territory where it lay in wait. The saltwater crocodile had likely been watching the creek for days. These ancient predators are opportunistic and patient, often waiting for prey to stray from the safety of the group. Much like they might observe animals at a watering hole, the crocodile had studied the predictable routines of the humans. On this day, it saw its opportunity in Barbara. The crocodile followed her silently from below, its massive body gliding effortlessly through the water. Its belly skimmed the sandy creek bed as it closed the distance, patient and relentless. Barbara, blissfully unaware, floated toward the bend where the water deepened, and the others on the shore lost sight of her. Then it happened. The attack came swift and brutal. The crocodile surged upward with astonishing speed, its powerful jaws clamping down on Barbara. She had no time to scream. The force of the strike yanked her under immediately, the thrashing tail turning the water into a wild frenzy. Within moments, both Barbara and the predator had disappeared beneath the surface. The creek returned to its deceptive calm, the ripples fading as quickly as they had appeared. The adults and children on the shore, engrossed in their conversations and play, noticed nothing at first. It wasn't until Barbara's cousin called out to her and received no reply that unease began to creep in. The teenagers swam out to look for her, their laughter turning to concern as they realized she was nowhere to be seen. Panic set in as the adults spread out along the creek, calling her name and scanning the water for any sign of the girl. By the time they had alerted the nearest emergency services, precious hours had passed. The closest response center, located in Dundee, was a grueling 7-hour drive away. Despite the distance, the first helicopter arrived within 3 hours and search efforts intensified. Hundreds of people from Naranga and neighboring communities combed the area, searching the creek, the river, and the surrounding bushland. Authorities suspected the worst almost immediately. However, no one was certain at the moment. The complete silence surrounding Barbara's disappearance pointed to a crocodile attack, an unsettling hypothesis given the creature's reputation in the region. Although such attacks were rare, the saltwater crocodile, measuring up to 20 feet long in some cases, was a feared and revered predator. For the indigenous community, these creatures held cultural and spiritual significance, a symbol of nature's power and balance. 2 days later, the search came to a grim conclusion. Barbara's remains were discovered tangled among reeds about a mile upstream. The recovery brought heartbreak but little relief. The body bore the unmistakable marks of a crocodile's jaws, and the extent of the damage left no doubt about the ferocity of the attack. There was little left of her, and authorities knew they had to act quickly to recover as much as possible before the crocodile returned to feed again. Based on the condition of the remains, experts estimated the crocodile to be at least 12 feet long. The search then shifted to focus on finding the predator responsible. Armed with this knowledge, trackers and wildlife officials scoured the waterways, determined to ensure the safety of the community. On June 7th, they found it, a massive 14-foot male resting on a sandbank, its ancient, unblinking eyes betraying no emotion as it lay motionless in the sun. The decision was made to euthanize the animal on site. A necropsy later confirmed the worst. Barbara's remains were found in its stomach. The aftermath left Naranga in mourning. The loss of a child sent shockwaves through the small community, touching every household. The creek, once a place of joy and togetherness, now carried an air of sorrow and fear. For the indigenous residents, the tragedy struck a deeper chord. The saltwater crocodile, or gal, was both a totem and a reminder of the delicate balance between humans and nature. The tragedy also reignited a broader debate about crocodile management in the Northern Territory. While some called for measures to control the growing population of these predators, others warned of the ecological consequences of such actions. Barbara's family, however, had little time for such arguments. Their grief was overwhelming, a void that no words or actions could fill. The community rallied around them, providing support in the only way they knew how, by standing together. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by nearly every resident of Naranga. What little remained of Barbara was laid to rest, a heartbreaking end to a short, vibrant life. In the weeks that followed, the people of Naranga adjusted to a new reality. The creek, once a hub of activity, was now avoided by most. Parents kept their children close, and conversations often turned to the tragedy, the shadow of it lingering over the town. August 18, 2018 was a sweltering night in southern Louisiana. The heat clung to the air like wet wool, heavy and inescapable, and the dark waters of the Atchafalaya Basin lay still beneath the thick cover of cypress and Spanish moss. Insects hummed in waves, frogs croaked from unseen banks, and something large shifted just beneath the surface. Slow, patient, and perfectly quiet. On nights like these, it's easy to forget how dangerous the swamps can be. But for 28-year-old Deshaun Carter, danger was already on his heels. Deshaun had been on the run for nearly 3 days. A series of armed robberies in Baton Rouge had escalated fast when one turned violent, leaving a bystander wounded and Deshaun's charges upgraded to attempted murder. He was already out on bond for a carjacking earlier that summer, and this time he knew he wasn't getting another chance. The police had his name, his face, and a warrant in hand. So he ran, first in a stolen car, then on foot, ducking through back roads and service lanes, staying ahead of the sirens by minutes at a time. He wasn't a hardened criminal, he wasn't a mastermind. Deshaun had grown up just outside Baton Rouge, bouncing between low-paying jobs, construction, warehouses, whatever was available. By his mid-20s, he had fallen in with a crew pulling off petty thefts and fast cash scams, always looking for the next score. Most of it was low stakes until it wasn't. No one ever accused him of thinking long-term. His record read like a slow unraveling. And by the time he vanished, even the people closest to him had started to assume he wouldn't be coming back. His luck ran out near a shuttered bait shop south of Henderson. He blew a stop sign and nearly hit a parish deputy. When the cruiser gave chase, Deshaun floored it, but the road was narrow and slick with runoff. After just a few minutes, he lost control, clipped a tree, and bailed into the woods without looking back. The dogs came next, along with floodlights and more vehicles. With no weapon and no plan, he sprinted blindly toward the only escape he saw, the swamp. The Atchafalaya Basin is the largest wetland in the United States, stretching across nearly 1 million acres of southern Louisiana. It's a place where people disappear, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. The terrain is a patchwork of bayous, canals, and swamps so thick with undergrowth and water hazards that even locals tread carefully. Gators, cottonmouths, and wild hogs are common, but it's the gators that rule the water. American alligators are ambush predators, silent, territorial, and incredibly well adapted to the murky wetlands they call home. They rely on stealth rather than speed, often lying motionless just beneath the surface with only their eyes and nostrils exposed. In this position, they can observe their surroundings for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Despite their size, they move with surprising agility, using powerful tails to lunge forward in bursts of speed that can catch even experienced hunters off guard. At night, they become even more dangerous. Low light gives them a tactical advantage, and their sensory organs, particularly the pressure-sensitive receptors on their snouts, allow them to detect even the faintest vibrations in the water. It's during these hours that their natural hunting instincts become most active, and they're more likely to perceive unfamiliar movement as a threat or as a meal. Mature males can grow to over 11 feet long and weigh well over 500 pounds, though larger specimens are not unheard of in remote regions. When they attack, it's with brutal efficiency. They aim to kill quickly, biting down with a force of more than 2,000 pounds per square inch, clamping onto their target and dragging it underwater. From there, they perform what's known as a death roll, a violent twisting motion used to subdue, disorient, or tear apart larger prey. Most animals don't survive the first few seconds, and those that do rarely escape once the roll begins. Deshawn didn't think about any of that when he hit the water. By the time he reached the edge of a narrow canal, he was soaked with sweat and panic. The dogs were behind him, barking furiously somewhere in the trees, and flashlights were sweeping the tree line. Without hesitation, he dove in. The water was warm and thick with algae. Reeds tangled around his legs and the bottom fell away fast. He kicked forward chest deep, trying to keep quiet, trying to stay low. He figured he could make it across, maybe reach the far side and disappear into the woods. What he didn't see was the shape drifting silently toward him from the opposite bank. The gator had been still until then, resting in the shallows beneath a tangle of roots. The movement in the water had caught its attention, and with barely a ripple it closed the distance. Deshawn was halfway across the canal when it struck. The first hit came from the side, fast and violent. The gator lunged upward, jaws open, and slammed into Deshawn's lower back, clamping down across his hip and thigh. He let out a scream that cut through the night. A shrill, panicked sound, but it didn't last long. The gator pulled hard, dragging him under. Deshawn kicked furiously, surfacing once with an arm flailing above the surface. For a second, it looked like he might break free, but then the gator rolled. The spin was brutal. It twisted his torso hard, breaking bone and tearing muscle. His head surfaced briefly, mouth open, eyes wild. He tried to scream again, but the second roll came faster, teeth sinking into his ribs, spinning him deeper. A cloud of blood spread through the reeds as his body went still. His final breath was swallowed by the swamp. Deputies heard the splashing but couldn't see through the thick brush and darkness. Unsure of what had happened or how many people were in the water, they held their position and radioed for assistance. Between the unstable footing, deep water, and the risk of encountering an armed suspect or aggressive wildlife, protocol was to wait for daylight and trained personnel. By the time wildlife officers and recovery crews arrived the next morning, the canal had gone quiet. The only visible signs of a struggle were a torn sneaker tangled in the reeds and a streak of blood along the mud bank. Searchers spent several hours combing the area by boat and from shore, using long poles and thermal equipment to scan beneath the surface. The water was murky, filled with debris, and visibility was limited. After several sweeps turned up nothing, officials began to suspect the presence of a large alligator. When a gator was spotted nearby, circling boats and showing signs of defensive behavior, it was flagged for removal. 2 days later, the same animal was captured and euthanized under public safety guidelines. At just over 11 feet long, the gator's size and proximity made it the likely suspect. An examination confirmed it had consumed human remains. Inside, investigators found part of an arm, shredded fabric, and a partial pelvis, enough to make a positive ID. The recovery was partial and the body was never fully retrieved. But there was no doubt about what had happened. The canal gave up just enough to tell the story, and then it closed again. Deshawn Carter was identified through fingerprints taken during a prior arrest. His mother was contacted by a detective from the local sheriff's office, the same one who had been assigned to locate and arrest him earlier that week. She declined to speak publicly, and the funeral was held quietly, attended by only a few family members. The case was closed and the warrant was withdrawn. There was no press conference or major media coverage, just a short mention in the local paper noting that a suspect had died in a suspected alligator attack while fleeing police in the Atchafalaya Basin. The article didn't include quotes from law enforcement or family. It didn't need to. For most, the story was already over. Among the officers involved in the search, reactions were mixed. A few expressed regret privately, others called it an unfortunate outcome but not a surprising one. No one expected a situation like this, but no one seemed particularly shocked either. For the victims of the robberies, store clerks, a delivery driver, and the man injured during the final incident, the news didn't bring much relief. There were no charges filed, no restitution, and no court dates ahead. Just an abrupt end to a case that had barely started. Deshawn didn't die in custody or stand trial. He died alone in the swamp, far from the streets where it all began. And by the time the water went still again, there wasn't much left to bring back. The swamp wasn't the only place hiding danger. On October 22, 2002, the serene wetlands of Kakudu National Park in Australia's Northern Territory were bathed in moonlight. Known for its boundless beauty and diverse wildlife, Kakudu was a sanctuary where visitors came to escape the chaos of the world. For Isabel Von Jordan and her sister Valerie, it seemed like the perfect retreat after surviving one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in recent history. Yet, their misfortunes were far from over. The sisters, originally from Heidelberg, Germany, had come to Australia for what was meant to be a relaxing holiday. Days earlier, they had been dancing and celebrating at Bali's Sari Club, a popular destination for tourists. Their night of fun turned into a nightmare when a car bomb exploded outside the bar, killing 204 people and injuring more than 200 others. Miraculously, Isabel and Valerie had left the club shortly before the blast. Shaken but grateful to be alive, they fled to Darwin, Australia to visit friends who had also been at the club. Thankfully, these friends had survived and were now recovering from their injuries. Seeking solace and safety, they joined a 4-day tour to Kakudu National Park, hoping to leave the horrors of Bali behind. Kakudu, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, spans over 7,700 square miles of wetlands, mangroves, and floodplains. Its breathtaking landscapes and thriving wildlife make it a haven for nature enthusiasts. Among its inhabitants are saltwater crocodiles, massive predators known for their stealth and ferocity. These creatures, or salties as Australians call them, are apex predators capable of growing over 20 feet in length and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. They remain among the most aggressive crocodile species, posing a significant danger to anyone venturing into their territory. On their third night in Kakudu, Isabel, Valerie, and their fellow tourists gathered around a campfire under a starlit sky. Their guide, 46-year-old Glenn Robles, had worked with Guana Adventure Tours for over a decade. His relaxed demeanor reassured the group as he suggested a late-night swim at Sandy Billabong, a tranquil freshwater pool surrounded by lush vegetation. Some tourists hesitated, pointing out the warning signs about crocodiles posted near the area. Glenn dismissed their concerns, insisting the Billabong was safe and home to only harmless freshwater crocodiles. Trusting their guide's expertise, the group followed his lead. At around 11 p.m., several tourists, including Isabel and Valerie, waded into the still water. The moon reflected on the Billabong surface as they laughed and floated, enjoying the peaceful moment. Glenn left the area briefly to speak with another guide, leaving the swimmers unsupervised. Beneath the surface, unseen by the group, a massive saltwater crocodile lurked. Silent and calculating, it moved closer, hidden in the shadows of the water. The attack came with terrifying speed and precision. In one swift motion, the crocodile surged from the depths, its massive jaws clamping onto Isabel's leg. The force of the bite dragged her underwater in an instant. She let out a scream, her voice sharp and filled with terror, before it was swallowed by a splash as the predator disappeared with her into the darkness. Valerie, frozen in shock, screamed for her sister, but the water was already still again, save for faint ripples where Isabel had vanished. A few moments later, the crocodile surfaced briefly, its head emerging from the water with Isabel's lifeless form clamped in its jaws. Her body was limp, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the monstrous predator and its victim. The group, horrified and helpless, scrambled to the shore, their panicked shouts echoing through the night. Valerie stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the water. unable to process the gruesome scene that had just unfolded. Desperate, Glenn returned and attempted to take control of the situation. He contacted park authorities, but there was little anyone could do in the dead of night. The crocodile had already disappeared back into the murky depths with its prey. Hours passed in a blur of fear and disbelief as the group waited for daylight, hoping for some resolution, though they already knew the outcome. At dawn, the search began in earnest. Park rangers scanned the billabong with boats and spotlights, their faces grim as they prepared for what they might find. Eventually, the predator was spotted, its massive body floating near the surface with Isabel still in its grip. The rangers shot the crocodile, bringing an end to the horrifying ordeal, and retrieved Isabel's mutilated body. Subsequent investigations revealed that Glenn had ignored critical safety warnings. As an experienced guide, he should have known that saltwater crocodiles frequented the billabong, despite its freshwater appearance. His negligence and misplaced assurances had cost Isabel her life. Convicted of recklessly endangering his clients, Glenn received a 3-year suspended prison sentence. His reputation and career were irreparably damaged. For Valerie, the loss was incomprehensible. Isabel had survived the carnage of Bali only to meet her end in the jaws of a predator she never saw coming. The sisters had sought peace and safety in the wilderness, but fate had other plans. Kakadu National Park, with all its beauty and allure, had become the backdrop to a tragedy that would haunt those who witnessed it forever. It was November 2007 at the Mikosuke Indian Reservation Resort and Convention Center in Dade County. The resort, nestled along the vast wilderness of the Everglades and near a natural lake, was quieter than usual. The high season had long passed and the usual crowds of tourists were gone. Only a handful of conventions remained. The air was calm, with evening temperatures hovering around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The resort was hosting 2 main events, an engineering convention and a farewell for Wall Street executives. While business was steady, it wasn't the bustling, high-energy environment that had recently defined the resort. Instead, it was a lull, a welcome break after weeks of back-to-back events. However, outside the peaceful ambiance of the resort, in the murky underbrush of Miami, a different kind of tension was building. Justo Padron and his accomplice, Thatcher, 2 seasoned car thieves, were prowling the parking lot. The off-season had been rough for them, with fewer distracted tourists to target, and they had grown desperate. Their criminal careers had always been low-risk and non-violent, avoiding the violence that plagued other parts of Miami's underbelly. But with fewer cars to steal and their usual source of income dried up, they had turned to the resort parking lot, hoping for a break. They slinked through the lot, hiding in bushes and waiting for the perfect opportunity. They spent the morning stealing electronics and small valuables from unlocked cars. But the real prize eluded them, a car with the keys left in the ignition. As the day wore on, the 2 men grew increasingly impatient. They had no intention of leaving empty-handed. The day's activities inside the resort went on unnoticed by the thieves as they continued their work. By early afternoon, Thatcher's patience paid off. He spotted a car with its keys still in the ignition. It was an expensive sedan, one that might hold more than just cash. Thatcher called Justo, signaling him to join. But as he slid into the car and started the engine, sirens pierced the air. 2 police cars pulled into the lot. Justo saw them first and shouted a warning, but the sound of the engine starting had already drawn attention. Thatcher attempted to reverse and flee, but the patrol car behind him blocked his escape route. Before he could react, 2 officers pulled him from the car and took him to the ground. Meanwhile, Justo bolted. He dashed into the brush, weaving through the dense vegetation of the Everglades, his bare feet moving with surprising speed and agility. The officers chased after him, but the terrain worked to Justo's advantage. They stumbled and tripped, struggling to keep up with the thief. Justo was fast and he knew these trails well. He had been running through this terrain since his teenage years when he and Thatcher had first turned to petty crime. Ahead of him, he saw the lake, a narrow body of water that marked the boundary of the resort. The fence line was within reach. If he could make it to the water, he was confident he could escape. He didn't think twice. Without slowing, he leapt into the murky lake. The lake, spanning about 50 feet across, served as a natural boundary between the resort's grounds and the untamed Everglades. Encircled by dense vegetation, it was a tranquil yet ominous stretch of water that most guests and staff instinctively avoided. To the thief in flight, however, its calm surface seemed inviting. Justo failed to notice the warning signs posted along the banks, cautioning of hidden dangers. The staff and guests of the Mikosuke Resort had gathered to watch the chase. Some pointed and shouted, urging Justo to stop, warning him of the danger in the water. They knew what the tourists often did not. Poncho, the large alligator, called that lake his home. Poncho was a familiar sight to the staff, basking in the sun along the banks of the lake. At 13 feet long and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, he was the undisputed ruler of the waters. While his massive form was often seen lounging lazily, the locals understood the danger he posed. Warnings were posted around the water, but Justo, consumed by his escape, paid them no attention. Poncho, roused from his midday nap by the commotion, shifted his gaze toward the water. He saw Justo, a figure darting through the murky depths. The sight was unusual. No human had ever dared to swim across his domain before. To Poncho, it was clear. This human was a meal waiting to be claimed. The crowd on the shore began to yell louder, urging Justo to turn back. The two officers, breathless from the chase, joined in on the chorus, but Justo was too focused on the fence in the distance. His strokes were strong and his head broke the surface of the water every few seconds, but he paid no attention to the signs of danger. He had made it halfway across the lake now, but Poncho had already slipped into the water and was moving toward him with terrifying speed. The police officers and resort staff watched in horror as the alligator closed the distance. Justo was unaware, and with each stroke he moved closer to his doom. When Poncho finally struck, it was fast and silent. The alligator's massive body surged from the depths, latching onto Justo with a grip of iron. Before he could react, Poncho had him in its jaws, and the death roll began. The chaotic sound from the shore filled the air, but for Justo, all that existed was the crushing grip of the alligator's jaws and the violent spinning of its body. He struggled, his hands clawing at the alligator's scales, but it was no use. The more he fought, the tighter Poncho's grip became. Water flooded his lungs as the gator spun him with terrifying speed. The pain was immense, and soon his consciousness began to fade. The crowd on the shore stood frozen, unable to help as Poncho dragged Justo beneath the surface. The officers watched in disbelief, too far away to intervene. The lake was murky and Justo's figure disappeared into the dark depths. Poncho didn't waste time with the usual surface spins. Instead, he took Justo deep, 50 feet under the water, where it could finish the kill without any interference from above. The alligator held its prey in place, its massive body curling around Justo, applying crushing pressure until his heart ceased to beat. It wasn't until Justo's struggle stopped that Poncho released him. The alligator swam to a more secluded part of the lake with its kill, where it could feed in peace. Back at the resort, Thatcher was being driven away in handcuffs. He had been arrested and taken to the nearest jail, but all he could think about was Justo. He had heard the screams from the shore, and he knew his friend was in trouble. There was nothing he could do now, and he was left helpless, knowing he would never see Justo again. By the time Thatcher arrived at the jail, divers and additional police had arrived at the lake. They scoured the waters, searching for Justo's body. Hours later, they found him, his lifeless body still held in the alligator's jaws. The police killed the alligator and removed what remained of Justo's body. When they informed Thatcher, he sat in his cell numb. He wasn't able to attend the funeral, left to reflect on the life of crime that had led to his friend's death. All he could do was mourn in silence. The Miccosukee Indian Reservation Resort would never again tolerate the presence of a predator in its waters. After the tragedy, they ensured that no alligator would make its home near the resort again. It was May 2013 in the rural outskirts of Cam Ranh, Cambodia's second-largest city. The air hung thick with humidity, the scent of stagnant water and decaying fish settling over the rows of crocodile farms that line the countryside. More than 900 such farms operated in the region, their concrete enclosures housing thousands of prehistoric reptiles. The farmers knew the risks, but the industry had sustained their families for generations. Luan Nam had been part of this world for decades. At 72 years old, he had built his farm from the ground up, his enclosures housing more than 40 crocodiles. His business had seen better days. Years ago, a single adult female could fetch over $500, but now the price had dwindled to a mere fraction. The industry was changing, demand fluctuating, but Luan remained steadfast. He was the president of the local Crocodile Farmers Association, a position of honor among those who wrestled daily with nature's deadliest creatures. He had survived close calls before, but experience did not equate to invincibility. Crocodile farming was not like raising cows or pigs. These were apex predators confined in overcrowded pits, their primal instincts intact despite years in captivity. The farms of Cam Ranh supplied skins to Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan, where they were turned into luxury handbags and belts. Their meat and body parts were exported for medicinal use, believed to hold healing properties in traditional Chinese medicine. But the industry was faltering. By 2019, hatchlings that once sold for $7 to $10 were worth only $2.50. Even adult crocodiles fetched a fraction of their former price. The farmers were barely breaking even, and Luan's family had long urged him to sell the farm. But he had refused. This was all he knew. The farm itself was a concrete pit. At its center lay a murky green pool, its surface still except for the occasional ripple as a crocodile shifted beneath the water. The enclosures were overcrowded, the reptiles packed in tight, their bodies piled on top of one another in the rare dry spaces along the perimeter. Wooden planks balanced precariously on raised concrete pillars provided access above the enclosures. Rusted steel steps led down to the feeding areas. The setup was rudimentary, dangerous. A single misstep could mean the difference between life and death. Luan worked with practiced efficiency. Every day he tossed dead fish and chunks of meat into the enclosures, the sound of snapping jaws and splashing water echoing against the cold concrete walls. He had grown accustomed to the sight of blood, to the constant fights that broke out as the crocodiles lunged at one another, their instincts untempered by captivity. But the greatest danger came not from feeding time, but from the nesting cages. Female crocodiles laid their eggs between February and May, fiercely guarding them against any threat. Their nests, hidden in metal cages within the enclosures, held clutches of up to 20 to 60 eggs, each one a valuable commodity. The eggs were sold to other farms or exported to Chinese buyers who paid premium prices. Extracting them was a delicate task, one Luan had performed countless times. He carried only a wooden stick for protection, a fragile defense against creatures capable of crushing bone in a single bite. That morning, Luan stepped onto the wooden walkway that extended over the crocodile enclosure. He scanned the area, his eyes locking onto the metal nesting cage set on a raised platform at the far end. Below, murky water pooled around the concrete where several crocodiles basked motionless. Every egg was valuable, and Luan needed to ensure a successful hatch. Luan carefully descended the middle steps and entered the enclosure, his eyes fixed on the crocodiles around him. The egg-laying cage sat elevated on a platform separated from the other crocodiles. As Luan neared the female, she hissed sharply, her mouth opening wide to reveal the full extent of her 7 deadly teeth. Without hesitation, Luan struck the cage with his stick. The crocodile responded by thrashing her tail, clearly agitated. Luan prodded her gently, prompting her to move out of the cage. As she neared the edge, she suddenly lunged forward, jaws snapping shut around the stick. Luan yanked it back instinctively, but the movement caused him to lose his balance. He stumbled and crashed to the ground with a heavy thud, the earth of the enclosure cold beneath him. A sharp burst of pain shot through him, his breath leaving in a gasp. The impact disoriented him, but he was aware of the movement around him. The crocodiles turned, their yellow eyes locked onto him, their bodies shifting with slow, deliberate intent. A silence fell over the enclosure, heavier than the humid air. Then they moved. The first crocodile surged forward, its jaws clamping onto his leg. A sharp, searing pain shot through him as he was wrenched sideways. He kicked with his free leg, the impact barely registering against the thick scales of another approaching reptile. More of them were closing in. Another crocodile struck, its teeth sinking deep into his arm before wrenching back. His scream barely left his throat before the limb tore free, disappearing into the beast's maw. Blood sprayed across the concrete. Chaos erupted. More crocodiles lunged, their tails thrashing as they fought over their struggling prey. One clamped onto his torso, the immense force crushing his ribs. Luan was dragged toward the water, his body scraping against the rough ground. Then the water swallowed him whole. The pool exploded into a frenzy of movement. The crocodiles twisted and rolled, their powerful tails propelling them in all directions. Red mixed with green as the feeding intensified. Limbs were torn, flesh ripped from bone. The final death roll sent what remained of him spiraling deeper into the murky depths. Moments later, the struggle ceased. The water stilled. The crocodiles returned to their usual positions, their hunger momentarily satisfied. By the time the workers arrived, Luan's remains lay scattered, his blood soaking the concrete, his arm missing, his body marked by countless bites. The pit was silent once more. The pool was thick with blood, its surface disturbed only by the lazy movements of the crocodiles that had resumed their basking. One reptile remained near the steps, Luan's black sandal still clutched between its teeth, a final grotesque reminder of the man who had ruled the farm for decades. Authorities arrived, but there was little to be done. The reptiles were agitated, snapping at anyone who came too close. Retrieving Luan's body was a challenge in itself, requiring careful maneuvering and the threat of gunfire to drive the creatures back. When they finally pulled him from the pit, there was barely anything left to recover. News of the attack spread quickly. The villagers spoke in hushed voices, murmuring that Luan had been too stubborn, that he should have sold the farm years ago. His family had pleaded with him to leave the business, but he had refused. Now, the very thing that had sustained him for so long had become his undoing. The farm was sold in the weeks that followed, and the crocodiles were sent to new enclosures, their fates uncertain. Some would be turned into luxury handbags, their skins tanned and polished for the fashion elite. Others would be harvested for meat, their bones ground for medicinal use. But the one that had feasted on Luan remained, lurking in the dark waters of another farm, waiting for the next mistake, for the next body to fall. March 29, 1987 was a still and serene day on the Prince Regent River in Western Australia. The remote wilderness, known for its breathtaking Cascade Falls, was shrouded in an almost otherworldly quiet. The dense mangroves lining the riverbanks cast long shadows over the brown, murky water, a surface that concealed unseen dangers below. The Prince Regent River, with its vast beauty, was home to some of the region's most dangerous predators, saltwater crocodiles, ancient creatures whose presence demanded respect and caution. On the water that day was the Lady G, a luxurious 105-foot yacht carrying an intimate crew and its passengers. Among them was 24-year-old American model Ginger Faye Meadows, a young woman brimming with energy and an adventurous spirit. Originally from Snowmass Village, Colorado, Ginger had grown up surrounded by nature's beauty. The mountains of her hometown had fostered a deep love for exploration and adventure. Friends and family described her as vibrant and fearless, with a zest for life that was infectious. After attending the America's Cup races in Australia earlier that year, Ginger decided to prolong her travels. She accepted a position as a chef's assistant aboard the Lady G, eager to see more of the country's rugged landscapes and immerse herself in its culture. The role allowed her to explore while earning her way from Perth to Darwin. After the journey, she planned to visit Papua New Guinea before heading home. But her journey would end abruptly in the wilds of the Prince Regent River just a day before her 25th birthday. The crew of the Lady G, led by skipper Bruce Fitzpatrick, had navigated into the Prince Regent River to explore the famed Cascade Falls. This picturesque destination was surrounded by dense vegetation and towering cliffs, creating a natural amphitheater for the cascading waters. As the group prepared to venture out, Fitzpatrick issued a stern warning to everyone. The river was not a place to take lightly. He emphasized the danger posed by its crocodiles, apex predators that patrolled the waters with stealth and precision. Despite these warnings, Ginger and her friend, Australian chef Jane Burchett, decided to cool off in the river near the base of the falls. Waist deep in the cool water, the two women splashed and laughed, enjoying a moment of reprieve from the oppressive heat. The river, framed by steep rock walls and lush vegetation, appeared deceptively tranquil. Above them, Fitzpatrick noticed a disturbance in the water that sent a jolt of fear through him. Moving toward the women was the unmistakable outline of a crocodile. The massive predator cut through the water with eerie silence, its knobby back and powerful tail propelling it forward. Fitzpatrick's urgent shouts shattered the calm, jolting Ginger and Jane from their moment of fun. They turned to see the crocodile less than 15 feet away, its immense jaws open wide, exposing rows of jagged teeth. Panic set in. Trapped beneath the slippery rock face of the falls and the predator closing in, they had nowhere to go. In a desperate attempt to deter the crocodile, Jane grabbed one of her shoes and hurled it at the animal. The projectile struck its head, momentarily startling it. The crocodile paused. Its mouth snapped shut, but it didn't retreat. Ginger, panicking, made a split-second decision. Letting go of Jane's arm, she turned and leapt into the water, aiming for the riverbank just 75 feet away. Jane could only watch in stunned disbelief as her friend made a desperate bid for safety. Ginger's movement triggered the crocodile's instincts. It lunged, its massive body displacing water with incredible force. Ginger had barely taken 2 strokes when the crocodile's powerful jaws clamped onto her legs and waist, dragging her under the surface with terrifying speed. The water erupted into chaos as the predator performed a death roll, twisting and thrashing its prey. For a brief moment, Ginger resurfaced. Her arms outstretched, she locked eyes with Jane, her expression a silent plea. But the crocodile's grip tightened and it yanked her under again, vanishing into the murky depths. From the Lady G, the crew and passengers watched in helpless horror. Fitzpatrick and others shouted and threw objects into the water, but the predator had disappeared. Jane, on the ledge at the base of the falls, stood paralyzed, her cries echoing as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The river, so serene moments earlier, returned to an eerie stillness, broken only by the anguished shouts of those on the shore. Frantic calls for help went out, and emergency services quickly mobilized a search effort. Local wildlife officials equipped with boats began scouring the river at dawn. Their work was fraught with danger. The waters teemed with crocodiles, each a potential threat to the search team. The next day, on what would have been Ginger's 25th birthday, her remains were discovered near a cluster of mangroves downstream. The retrieval of her body was not without peril. As officials worked to recover it, a large crocodile launched itself from the water, leaping nearly 4 feet into the air in an attempt to snatch the body bag. The predator's powerful jaws tore into the bag before retreating back into the water. Fearing another attack, the recovery team decided to wait for a larger vessel to safely transport Ginger's remains. They eventually succeeded, and her body was taken to Broome, where her husband traveled to identify her. The news of Ginger's death reverberated around the world, a tragic end to a life filled with promise and adventure. Thanks for watching this compilation. Not done watching yet? Click on the next video right now.